Thank you. Hey, good afternoon, Zen Masters, aspiring Zen Masters, and business analysts. As you heard, both of us are coming from financial services, but don't think that we will talk only about financial services. We are talking about cross industry, and we heard all that in the panel. So I want to just bring in some of the context here. Now, going back to one of the questions which I heard in the last session, where we talk about, look, my client is asking what can be automated, what is digitized here. And the response is that, okay, you work along with them and get that story. What we are trying to do here in this session, maybe for next 60 minutes, is to see how we have listened to the customers, right, across industries, and how we have condensed that information back to you to bring some of the key trends, behavior, attitudes, and the changes happening in the market, which will help you to bring in different elements when you do whatever we call as a design thinking, design doing, or the business requirement gathering, or whatever it may be, right? So these are all the pointers which should actually sprinkle down to your brain, and you decide whether you need to filter it out or you need to take it out, some of the elements of it for your day-to-day work. And we strongly believe, from an Accenture point of view, that these are some of the key driving factors, right? We were struggling to define what is digital. We are not getting into that dilemma at this point of time. We are trying to see that what client is asking today, or what are the dimensions typically come in the cross-section of business and technology, that will actually help you to do that, okay? Happy to take questions post that. We will have a quick run on these findings first, and we'll come back to certain analysis after that. We'll start with a video to start this discussion.
Today, new technologies are the fundamental building blocks of business. But to unlock their full potential, you have to take the right perspective. Accenture's Technology Vision 2016 brings 5 new trends that will change your perception, allowing you to create a digital culture geared for continuous adaptation. Because today, change must be built into an organization's DNA. But how? By empowering the one part of your business that is hardwired for evolution: your people. So, what breakthroughs will require us to see differently? Machines are joining the workforce, working with people to create new products and services, as well as bringing complementary skills that will make them trusted co-workers. The workforce will become more fluid, embracing a shape-shifting skill set that is highly technology savvy, so that together they can be prepared to tackle unpredictable challenges. People are using technology platforms to create entire ecosystems. These take on a life of their own and drive entirely new growth strategies for businesses. Digital disruption is no longer a surprise. Platform ecosystems are blurring industry boundaries, meaning the knock-on effects of innovation can be predicted and overcome. Digital ethics and cybersecurity are becoming fundamental to trust. It is no longer just a question of data protection, but of the morality of its usage and freedoms. With full awareness of these disruptions ahead, you can evolve to meet the challenge. Explore Accenture's Technology Vision to learn how to create a digital culture which empowers people to adapt and become agents of change.
That's a quick summary. ANUBHA, you would like to?
Good afternoon, everyone. I think before I get started on this, maybe a small thing just to give the context here. So I know Accenture has been coming to this convention for the last 4 years, and every time we've tried to make sure that we kind of bring forward our point of view on not only on business analysis, but in terms of our own industry and technology as well, because we believe those two are 2 important aspects of what the business analysts are really concerned about, right? So what you see here on the slide is essentially the evolution, what we believe on the industry side, essentially the trends that we've been seeing. And this is more of an Accenture point of view. So what we said in 2013, it was essentially the trend was more of every business being a digital business. What it meant was digital being a key driver in terms of the market differentiation in every industry, right? We moved on to 2014. We said we moved from digitally disrupted to a digital disruptor. So which meant, all the key industry players actually took on this transformation and actually started reimagining their businesses, right? They started using technology to shape what they wanted to give to their clients. And that became the key point at that point in time. 2015 is essentially, is where some of the leading digital enterprises actually started stretching their boundaries and actually started forming digital ecosystems, which was more important at that point in time. And that trend still continues. So in fact, all these three trends that we're saying is still continuing, right? 2015 is, as I said, right, since the boundaries extended, there were a lot more new things that came in, a lot more new competitors that came into picture. What we've been seeing is all of these trends as, we're watching all of these as consumers, as enterprises, right? And what we believe is all of this is going to continue in 2016 as well. Yes, with some of the, one of the key things being as people as the forefront, right? So essentially that's going to be the key driver with the entire digital disruption that we're talking about, and that's what we as Accenture believe, that people in each of this, in this entire digital disruption is going to be the important aspect. So carrying forward that whole primacy of people in the sense, why is people important? Why do we believe that that's an important aspect of, what we are talking about, right? So as we said, gone are those days when, we've been moved from the technology side where we had, all of the disruption that we spoke about, right? And now all of it requires people. So of course, the technology trends will continue to remain as focus, but an excess consumption of technology without focus on people will certainly be detrimental. So what we believe is, while the businesses are expanding, they need to certainly have people in the forefront as well, right? And what it means is essentially all of these technology trends are actually providing opportunity for our people to actually build capabilities that they've never built before. Which means what? That there has to be a change in the mindset of the organizations as well. So along with increasing our business in the digital space from a technology standpoint, we need to bring in the digital culture as well, right? And that's what a culture which is really has a lot more flexibility, which will actually be used as a change enabler for our people to actually build more skills and become a lot more relevant, right? So what we are talking about here on the slide are essentially 5 key technology trends, but what we believe is that on each of them, the people aspect is essentially the most important, and that's what is actually going to drive a lot more value in each of these aspects.
Yeah. So just to continue from there, right, if you look at these 5 dimensions of what we see on the market, and we are going to deep dive into each of these, what is essential over here is that you're talking about change, you are talking about liquidity. Don't take liquidity from a financial point of view, but the kind of modularity and the changes and the pace of the change and the great acceleration we are seeing, that actually provides a lot of liquidity in this. Now, to sense an information from that, you require a cognitive abilities and intelligent automation to do that, right? And that forms the next part of it, what we call as intelligence. And intelligence is not siloed. It's not coming from one instance of data or one source of information. It needs to be connected with the rest of the world. And so if you actually condense these 5 themes over there, it's all boiled down to what we call as a liquid, intelligent, and connected. And the liquid, intelligent, connected applied to applications. It applies to technology. It applies to business analysts also, right? You need to be open to see the change happening in the market. You need to be intelligent enough to infer from these changes. You need to be connected with communities and the rest of the world as well to expand your movement. Now, this tech vision, if I deep dive into the intelligent automation part, right, what we are talking about is not robotic process automation alone, right? Why I want to call it out is because you would have heard an intelligent automation in context of robotics, in context of process automation. We are going beyond that, right? How do we actually train the robots to think like humans, can actually infer from the past incidents, can look at the patterns, can understand emotions and respond to it, right? So actually I was with a client today morning, and we were actually discussing on some of the bots or robots in a different way getting into a sort of advisory services, right? The case in point here is that when you get a response from a customer, and the key example is, you would have seen if you watch If you have Asia Pacific clients and you watch Australian market, there was a rate change, which is a base rate change published by the Reserve Bank of Australia 2 days back. They cut 25 basis points on the base rate, and none of the banks have actually reduced their lending rate based on this 25 basis point. The banks were hovering around 10 to 15 basis points. Lot of sentimental backlash from the market to each of these banks. Even Prime Minister of Australia today morning commented that the banks need to confidently communicate back to the customers of why that change is not done. Now, here is a case in point for any of the business analysts or for the banks as such to see that how this sentiment analysis actually gets captured and what is the pace of response to that. We were actually watching this space for last 2 days to see what sort of a response time each of these banks takes. You will not believe that the banks typically take 12 to 24 hours to respond to such sort of sentiments coming on this, right? And that's where we can even think of putting an intelligent automated. I'm not telling that somebody who can give a typecasted response to that, you please call back my toll-free number 1800XYZ. That's not the intent, right? You have a context of this customer about what is his loan account, in what rate it is running in a floating or a fixed rate, and you can actually advise him that what is the switchover, the possibilities for this account and what could be the cost of this change. Very, very contextual. There are use cases where the customers, once they know that the bots are the guys who are chatting to them, they lose that emotional content in the talk and they will switch off this context, right? I don't want to talk to a robot, I don't want to talk to a machine who actually infer something from the historical data and talk to me. There are intelligent robots which can actually switch the context back to an actual advisor. Because the way I'm going to respond to the bots have enough intelligence to assume that this is not the right point, I should actually engage him furthermore. I need another support from an actual human who can respond to this particular user. And I listen. I, as a bot, can listen to the conversation between these two and then learn from it and again address that scenarios when it comes again, right? So it's a self-learning part of it. The point I'm making here is that these robots are not going to change the human workforce. It's not. The point here is that it's going to create a productive relationship with the worker, with the workforce, with the people to do that part, right? Now, here is a case where a lot of intelligence are being thrown out to it. The human beings need to get a confidence about the capability of the robots. We are talking about what logic they have applied to come to a conclusion. Am I confident with that conclusion? And that confidence building activity is the symbiosis happening between the robot and the human. And thereafter, it becomes an assistant for this human workforce to do that. So it's a joint story we are talking about, going back to what ANUBHA was talking about as people first, machines actually augmenting the capacity, the productivity, the capability, and the performance of human beings. Now, here is a case of liquid workforce. Now, when machines are going to respond to all this, what is that human going to do? We told that it is going to be a productive relationship, but the level of performance of these human beings would be at a different level, right? And that's where much more capabilities, wider capabilities need to be acquired by the human beings, more towards the cognitive and judgmental capabilities rather than analyzing volume of data and doing very typecasted stereotype works, right? So the whole level of engagement of human beings is going to be escalated immensely. And that's where, if you really look at the project-oriented work groups emphasizing collaboration, agility, and skill sharing, we were hearing from the panel on the multi-skilling, right? What is the digital BA versus do we have a legacy BA? And what sort of capabilities we need to bring in. Each of you might be coming from one specific industry, have experience around that, have accumulated wealth of information around that, but what is the agility factor for it? When you say that a customer is not a customer for a banking today, we call it as a consumer for the bank. And if you look at the kind of retail experience for these consumers, we call them as consumers and not customers. So what is that difference? Are you talking about customer in the way we were talking about customer in the last 20 years? No, the expectations are completely changed, what we call as a liquid expectation. Just to quote an example, right, on liquid expectation. See, we have been seeing that the human interacting with human and completing transaction. We are hearing the machine interacting with human and doing the transaction. And we heard in the panel also that there could be a zero UI also for these interactions, right? And the classic case in point is always the Uber, right? You just walk out of Uber, there's an invisible payments transactions happening somewhere because the request you made implicitly means that you need to pay at the end, and that is tightly integrated to it. You need not initiate any payment at that point of time. So absolutely, the world is going to be sort of an invisible, transaction mode. And if that is the case, If I can do that in Uber, can I do it in any other transaction I'm doing? Because I'm committing to that particular value transfer earlier. Why do I want to actually commit a transaction towards the end of it, right? So these things is what I'm talking about, the skill sharing. You see some pattern somewhere, you see an expectation of the customer in that area. What is the kind of shift of these expectations in our industry? We need to really see that. And that can come across anywhere, right? Be it retail, education. Education is a case in point. Let me take that example, right? When we did this research in Arizona University, the mathematics courses are delivered by bots. Okay? When I say that, you are actually having a contextualized understanding about what are the intellectual capabilities of the student and how do I attune my course delivery to them rather than the professor giving one lecture to 40 people. Now, where does the professor's role comes in this, right? The professor actually teaches the boards, number one. Number two, when boards are in action, he can actually focus his time on the research. And now, you look at the business outcome. It's not for the sake of automation we are doing, right? The 12% improvement in overall success rate, 40% of the students who got graduated had a better, the completion time compared to the students who have not gone through this automated learning mode. There are absolute business outcome validations on these results, and we need to, as a BA, when you actually look at requirements, you need to see how this connect between a human and the machines can be productive to bring in the better results. So these are the things we are talking at the integration level. Now, if you structurally see the kind of an application, starting from an engagement to a process, to an application stack or a software, and then to a data layer, we are talking about an application and a data stack to be a platform. And what is platform? Platform is beyond the functions they perform, right? It's talking about opening up your application for multiple other things. And what are the multiple other things we are talking about? You look at Uber again going as a case, right? Uber is not a transport agency, right? Most of you would have seen. The statement made by Uber CEO is that I want to actually address the question of car ownership. What does it mean? If I want to actually address the equation of car ownership, that means it is going to impact automobile manufacturers. It's going to impact insurance. It's going to impact the transport, of course, which is the first use case for it. It can also impact the supply chain, right? And there are many use cases which can come from it, right? Right from spares, because we are building a larger ecosystem of the partners into it, and you have the partners who supply the automobile, the vehicles, the insurance, the drivers, the training, and all that of thing. So you become a platform which connects the producer and consumer, and that's about the platform is. Getting back to a context of any industry, if I take banking an example, and the payments is my area, if you see that, traditionally all the banks have been doing these payments, and if you are very familiar with India market or any other market, all the types of payments have been handled by their payments application. And what is that it is doing? Essentially, two things. You do a credit and a debit, and you do a messaging for it to tell the other guy that, look, I have credited or debited you, right? Message and settlement. Look at what Western Union has done. Western Union is primarily a messaging company. It was a telex message sending firm. And they have become a payments company primarily because they understood that beyond the message transfer, if I can do the value transfer also within the message, I becomes a payment company. The expansion of the horizon, or what we call as a creative reframing of this problem statement as per the design thinking, is very critical in our today's life, right? Don't take the requirement or a questions by the face of it telling that this is in context within that for this particular customer. Ask why, what, how at every point. Because these contexts and the constraints we are talking about is very much limited by the client or the people who are reciting these requirements back to you. It need not be limited by these things, right? How do we look at beyond that? And that exactly is the platform economy we are talking about. How do we bring in the developer communities? Let me take one more example from banking. Traditionally, your accounts are maintained, payments are done, other services are provided by the banks. It's only done by the banks. Now, regulators are getting into the landscape and telling that, look, you need to be more competitive. I'm bringing the whole gamut of the fintechs into this area, and they can do a lot of things which you are not doing today, or you don't have enough pace or acceleration to do it, right? For that, what you need to do as a bank is that you expose your APIs so all the third parties can consume it. You become a platform in the back end providing an account information services. A third party ABC actually requests for an account opening, can request for account inquiry, can request for transfer of funds from your account to any other account with your confirmation. So the banks is getting into a back-end model of utilization. You don't see, you don't experience, but you only provide a utility service to it. Now, this is what the platform all about. The big question for those firms is primarily to sit at a utility level or to get to a level of front-ending with the customer with what we call as moments of truth, right? Now, the platform part comes in when you see an industrialist way of handling, right? Let me quote one more example before you go to the next trend. One of our clients was telling, look, you talk about industrializing the payment, you know what is credit and debit, that's all happens in the payments. If that is a case, can I actually ask for a function from your payment system that I need to give a, affinity card or a add-on card to my daughter, telling that $200 is the limit for it every week, and it should only be spent during a weekend, and that weekend spend should be in, the terminals, what called as the post terminals or shops, which is not beyond 2 kilometers from my home. Can you actually build that sort of a context in this engine? The answer could be no. None of the firms today are able to give that sort of a flexibility in the way they are handling any of the payments. Payments is a case in point. There would be as many examples in other industries also. The point here is that contextualization to the client, the people focus we are talking about, is going to sit very near to the customer. And then distilling that and processing the connection with the rest of the systems and the world is going to be done by the platforms. And this is going to be a big game in the coming days. Predictable disruption. ANUBHA, you would like to?
Yeah, sure. So I think I wanted to add some points in the previous one also, but I guess it was too late. No, that's okay, not on the platform, the early one. Okay. So yeah, so Rajeev spoke about how the platforms are actually going to help the individual businesses to actually scale up in terms of the newer solutions that we can really build and the ecosystem that we can bring together. But for the platforms to be successful, there's an immense need for it to have an ecosystem that can actually support it, right? That can actually make it successful. And where does this ecosystem come from? This actually comes from the industries, from the disrupted industries that we talk about, the smart cities or the connected homes or the precision agriculture that we're talking about. So these are industries which are actually a source of disruption for themselves. But the biggest difference being that while traditionally we did not know how, there was no way for us to actually predict how big the disruption would be, these are much more predictable disruptions, right? So that's what we are talking about when we say, the industry boundaries are blurring. So that's a disruption that we are talking about. In terms of, the whole disruption, the extent of the disruption is that when the ecosystem is trying to actually come together, the effect that it has is not only on the adjacent industries, but also on the industries which are absolutely unrelated, right? And case in point being, today in today's world, we really do not know who our competitor could be, right? So we've seen examples of, I think Rajeev and I were talking about, right? So we've seen examples of Western Union, which is actually a biggest a payment client, right? Payment organization. It used to be a telecom company earlier, right? Similarly, Uber. Uber is the way we look at this taxi is more for a transportation, but the dimension that they started going into is also in terms of transporting medical equipments and actually, and transporting also the vaccines. So which is essentially an indication for the healthcare industries. So what I'm trying to say is that as BAs today, in fact, when we are looking at solutions for our clients, we don't know, we should not really be keeping only the industry competitor in mind. We don't know where the competitor could come from. And that's becoming more and more relevant when you're talking about the current disruption.
Yeah, so if you see that cross-industry competition and you talk about cross-industry relevance, what actually connects them? It's consumer and it's data, right? Because as a consumer, if you see all the industries over there, from an automobile to media to healthcare to financial services, I am actually consuming services from all the industries. So that's a connecting link across industries, number one. Number two, my data in one of these industry is relevant for others also. We have a very good use case for a global client who actually want to foster what you call a healthy living to a banking client, to a banking customer, right? And that's where, we call that concept as everyday bank, which means you touch the customer not only for financial services, it could as well be non-financial services contacts also, right? So the case in point there is that the client has been provided the mobile application, they have a wearables and all that, and based on number of steps you take per day or whatever calorie you burn, you get an incremental interest rate benefits for it. That actually foster a healthy living, right? This is one. The other part of it, I just want to make my consumer as an ambassador from a larger community, right? And that's where the group savings account comes in. And there's a bank in Nordic who has actually done that. When you actually open an account with them and you talk about this account to your friends, and if you can actually refer another 20 people, and there are different slabs they have given, 5 referral to 25 or about 25, whatever, you get an incremental benefit on your savings account. So you use your consumers as an ambassador for it, right? And the earlier part I'm talking about is connecting the healthcare to banking. There are as many examples across the fields. Now, when you deal with data, and that's where the privacy comes in, right? And we are going to talk beyond privacy today. And privacy part is again going back to the open API. As a consumer, I've given right to access my accounts, to initiate a payment to third parties, be it a digital wallet or any other provider. And I want to actually restrict what exactly they are going to share, right? And when my bank, as a custodian of my privacy data or a private data, how do they actually ensure that they take care of all the security elements to it? And a lot of things will come with biometrics. Some of you would have actually, watching the market, has seen that Samsung has launched their Galaxy Note 7 yesterday with iris reader, iris scanner. Now you look at the scope of that in India to start with. All that we are talking about, Jan Dhan account, you talk about the Aadhaar, and you talk about IMPS. The combination of these three is a powerful platform. And what is required there is to actually authenticate the customer who are eligible to get into this ecosystem of Jan Dhan and Aadhaar and IMPS for that matter, right? And there are as many use cases in other geographies also. Again, if you are actually bringing a chatbot for a conversation, the bank would like to know how the chatbot know that this is customer A and not customer B. You can do through any of the biometrics part. You talked about the voice metrics. And by the way, there are some of the banks who use this voice recognition in their call center and reduce the time taken to recognize the customer. It's not like I ask your maiden name, second name, and third name, and fourth name, and get into loops to validate you. Parallelly, the system actually recommends that, yeah, this is Mr. X, because they have a sample of data for it, and it is scientifically proven, right? So the security part of data is very much critical. Now, there is an interesting element beyond the security of data in this entire work, right? What we are talking about, a digital ethical dilemma. Now, what is the digital ethical dilemma here is that you take a case of Tesla or any other auto-driven, automatic-driven car, and it gets into a scenario where it has a choice to make, either to hit a car with a family or to hit an old man on the pedestrian walk, right? This is a scenario analysis or a use case for you. What is the kind of dilemma as a driver you will do, and what sort of this ethical dilemma handling you want to actually pass it on to the system as a requirement, right? These are not simple examples we are talking about, right? The moment you see that machine getting into these areas, I think the extension of thought of the requirement go to such, I would say the case could be 1 in 1,000 or 1 in million, but these cases, how do we actual that dilemma would be a key part. And that's what we talk about ethics and security in data and digital. Now, coming to new IT, right? We talked about a lot of trends. We talked about people first. And when you actually see that, some of them will appear to be and outperform a futuristic category, right? And it is truly so in many of the cases. Maybe a 5% of high performers in each of these industries are there imbibing these changes and making their changes, system changes to adapt to that. If you look at a traditional enterprise, right, in any of the industry, they run with a legacy system, maybe 30-year-old, 50-year-old, or there are even firms which, especially in the financial services, you will see those with 2 centuries of existence and all that statements, right? Now, if that is the case, they are running with a legacy platforms today, and we are talking about a futuristic point where they need to reach or they need to aspire to be, or the high performers are there today. What is the journey from today to there? And it cannot be a single wave of journey or single wave of path to it. And that's what we call as dual velocity path, where primarily you need to make your applications ready for future, right? The first thing you will do is that you make your applications effective to the extent possible with whatever amenities and facilities and resources you have to do it today. All that we are talking about, industrialization, intelligence, and all will sit there. The second part of it is that when my application set works with that effectiveness, can I make them ready for the future? It's not rip and replace. It's not telling that, okay, all my web application I will replace with responsive UI, with mobile-enabled applications and all. The journey cannot be a single step. It needs to be a staircase journey. And that staircase in between, what are the stairs we are talking about, is primarily making them enabled for the future, enable them for digital. And what does it mean for an enterprise? And the third part is where we talk about the outperform class, right? All that we talked about, the intelligent automation, they talk about the disruption through digital, all will sit in out there. So the journey is two-dimensional or two-velocity. We can call it as bimodal, dual velocity in whatever parlance we want to do. And the three box we are talking about, the innovate is to make effective with your scope today, accelerate is to make it future ready, and the third part, outperform, is where you're going to create a high-velocity enterprise. ANUBHA.
Yeah. So I know Rajeev just spoke about all the three pieces, right? Innovate, accelerate, and outperform. So innovate, the way we look at it from an Accenture standpoint, is essentially our standardized and industrialized delivery, right? Intelligent automation, liquid delivery using DevOps, agile kinds of frameworks, right? So that's essentially what we sum up as our innovate piece, right? Now when we talk about now given today's scenario, we all agree that there's a lot more need for the automation, right? It's becoming an important part of how the IT is maturing, right? Now, what you see on the slide is essentially, again, more of Accenture's point of view of how we believe we can bring in the efficiency in the IT systems, right? And what you see here is essentially, when you specifically talk about automation, it's about two aspects to it. One is a process-centric techniques, which is more around, you look at the processes which can be optimized, which can be eradicated, so that we can remove the redundant stuff, activities, and we can actually reduce the time, right? The other aspect to it is more on the technology-centric techniques, which is more around the automation, right? Essentially automating the repeated tasks, thereby being able to make the actual, deliver the final outcome. So essentially what we're saying is, this is, through this approach is what we believe is, we can take from the current state of the technology delivery to a futuristic state, which is a lot more relevant in the current scenario. A little bit more on the automation. So while I think Rajeev has already spoken about in lot more detail, right? So what we're talking about is, gone are those days. Yes, of course, as we said, there is an aspect of automation which is about, automating the repetitive steps or manual steps, right? But now we're talking about bringing intelligence into the automation. And that's what exactly is the next level in the automation. So as you can see here, right, in terms of what has been depicted below. So it's all about, so while the industrial automation and the robotic process automation continues to progress, we do, as humans, we are offloading a lot of our manual stuff to the robots to do that. But what is gearing up is a lot more bringing intelligence into what we have in the automation. And that's really is the crux. From an Accenture standpoint, our strategy is both ways. We are saying that we will actually, automate and augment the the decision-making, intelligent decision-making through automation, as well as continue to automate the repetitive tasks and the manual tasks, which is also required, right? And I think one of the surveys that was done in the Accenture is where we actually came to know that, we are in a position to actually forecast using intelligent automation. We are in a position to forecast close to 30 to 40%, more productivity gains when we are trying to use intelligent automation in the areas which is relevant, right? So that's exactly, what Accenture is thinking about. We believe this is the de facto tool which we should really be looking up to, right? And that's what it's all about.
Yeah. So just to map it to the kind of work we do, when you actually draw down the process and see that, okay, there is a system process, there is an operation process to it. The operations part of it, you have a relook onto it, okay? And definitely on the system side also, you look at the kind of the performance part you need to look at. You need to look at how you actually enhance the system performance. That's all said, done, and hygiene. But I'm talking about even the operation side. Even if there is authentication required, I can give you some more examples, live examples there. There are regulatory restrictions in some of the countries on the amount you can withdraw from ATM. And you want to make a branch without any teller. We want to physically create a branch without any teller. Now, how do you address this problem of that? If the withdrawal is above, say, $20,000, and you don't have a teller in the branch, you need a teller to authenticate it. And that's where the video teller comes in, right? You need not have a physical teller sitting in this branch signing off these challans and passing off this payment. You can have a video teller sitting remotely somewhere as a shared service across your 4,000, 5,000 branches, and he gets hooked up into it, and he authenticates this, that the customer X is actually withdrawing from X account, and then passes it over there. So there are solutions in automating a lot of things. If you really look at deep dive, and that's what the design thinking all about, going through the customer journey and seeing that what are the potential pitfalls or the happy moments for the customer, and how do we actually improve. It's not that you want to make it as a straight line of customer experience. You will have still fluctuations over there, but how do I reduce that customer experience fluctuations to a acceptable range by providing a lot of automation part. Automation is, again, I am re-emphasizing, is not about replacing human being, is about how you make them more productive, how you can have accelerated delivery. So we have a quick video on that, on the robotics, and we'll come back. Yeah, so moving on, I'm going back to the old question of having legacy applications, and you talk about mission to a human interaction that's smart today and all that. How do I go there? Let me give you a real case to you, right? The moment we actually enhance the digital customer face, all the channels we talked about, you are ultimately going to improve your revenue. You are going to improve your customer interactions. Today, customer might be interacting with you 5 times. When I say not a customer, customers interacting with you for 5 times, and you are going to interact with customer 5,000 times with enhanced digital or omni channels. Where does this 5,000 transactions going to hit? It's going to hit the same platform which we are catering to the 5 transactions earlier. Do we have the enough capacity to do that 5,000 transactions there? This is a real problem statement with some of the digital invaders. They're still running with a core system which cater to 5 transactions, 5,000 transactions. How do we actually find a smarter solution? The smarter solution is not rip and replace and come out with a solution which has actually 5,000 times TPS of what you were doing, or even with a 10%, 20% growth year on year for next 5 years. That's not the solution to be tactically addressed at that point of time as a smarter solution. And that's where the whole gamut of addressing your enterprise system to make it future ready comes in. We call it as application modernization, which has 4 dimensions. We talk about the intelligent decision making, where you bring in the cognitive agents also into it telling what could be the business case for you to modernize your application. It's not that typically in a medium-sized bank, if you're seeing 250 to 450 applications, we are not telling them to replace everything. What need to be replaced on a priority way, in a cognitive way, is what we talked about as intelligent decision making. Future proofing. What is future proofing? I don't want this capacity of 5,000 transactions every time. I'm seeing during a holiday, I'm seeing 50 transactions happening in a normal day. How do I make an infrastructure on demand for me? Which primarily means that the enterprise becomes a consumer of these services from somebody else. So this provider is going to provide this platform on demand. The enterprise is going to absorb it either through a commodity hardware or on cloud. Digital readiness, we talked about the APIs. I talked about the open APIs where regulators are mandating to do that. If you do that, your legacy system, which is a typical mainframe solution, how do I cater to all these open API? Leave the regulatory part of it. What about my customers asking for it? How do I build wrappers around my mainframe applications to enable, look like what is required for my digital channels? That's another segment of work. Future readiness, you see all the obsolete applications, going back to what ANUBHA was talking as Opera, the optimize, eradicate, and automate. You look at that principle and see what all things I can actually replace from my legacy architecture. So the application modernization is not a back-end activity today. It's a value-driven initiative. It's not talking about cost optimization. It's talking about enhancing the value you are providing through channels by seamlessly integrating to your legacy application, but it is ready for the future. And you take time, you buy time to buy a new application or an architecture or a stack or infrastructure to it, but meanwhile, tactically, you are addressing with a smarter solution. Now, so summarizing this, right, we talked about read ERP as an core application, or ERP might be relevant for other industries. The ERP plus the new technology, we are talking about the cloud and in-memory, and you talked about the digital, all that we considered about the AI cognitive, and by the way, the way Accenture sees digital is what we call as IMAX. It's interactive, mobility, analytics, cloud, and security, which is very, very key today. And all that bring together an ecosystem sitting together to come out with high velocity enterprise, right? And it helps you to deliver faster, which goes with the the theory of the great acceleration phase. It helps you to integrate with multiple the applications and the platforms. It can tailor to the price or the cost which client is looking at, bringing the right talent for it, and predict the higher accuracy your assets availability. And that essentially about the high velocity enterprise. So digital evolution, I think we had enough discussions in the previous panel also. I'm not attempting to define it, but in short form, it has moved away from SMAC, right? And the primary part which was missing in the SMAC is because we were not covering the security part of it. We're talking about social, mobility analytics and cloud, and that's where the interactive becomes one. And in one of the interesting equation I've seen in the recent past is guys who have studied the science and physics, the E is greater than MC square. E greater than MC square is experience is greater than your marketing, communications, and content. And that experience comes from interactive, and that's why it has a predominant place in the digital story. IMAX, and the S part of it, I talked about security, which about the biometric, which about the digital ethical dilemma I'm talking about, all that related to the security comes over there. And then this new IT leads to the design thinking, because when you do a design thinking here, and design thinking is beyond thinking, it is design doing. Some of you who have practiced the design thinking would have seen how fast, quickly you prototype, you pass through the customer journeys and all that. It's more about doing than thinking. Thinking and doing in action in very synchronous way. The new IT actually gives you a lot of enablers and thought points and the possibilities to come out with very wild ideas, which can still be considered to be a new disruptive solution in that particular problem statement.
I think that's
yeah, so you start with the mindset, and I think you will hear a lot of things about the design thinking now. The idea here was to actually provide the inputs which can enable you to do the design thinking, come out with a design mindset, focus on the people first part, which is the crux of the tech vision part we talked about, and that could be a creative solution for most of the problems you are going to address.
Right. I think just to add, the reason why we believe that design thinking is even more relevant for us is the fact that we talked about, right? Keeping design thinking also keeps the humans in a lot of focus, right? It's a very, very human-centric approach. And the fact that we say that for us, people is the primary thing, that the way we are looking at it, I think it really gels well with what we are looking at from our organization standpoint as well. And I think some of the key reasons, and some of them are very obvious, right? All the clients are really looking for us, and we do believe that this is the most innovative way for us to actually help them seek the problems and also actually solve problems for them. So that's exactly why we believe we should do this.
Yeah. We would be happy to take any questions or any other point of view you have. Yeah.
Hi Rajiv, hi ANUBHA, thanks for this session. And so my question is more in the context of financial services industry. So we keep reading that the margins as such for the financial services have been reducing for various reasons. And so for this kind of digital transformation, who should fund the innovation? Like, is it the IT companies which have to fund the innovation within themselves, or is it the clients who have to initiate, or from where should the, because it requires a lot of high-level skill set and high-level technologies that are required here. So
Yeah.
from where is the funding actually coming?
Yeah. So let's take a step back, right? I think you talked about the margin pressures, and if you really see this from a profitability point of view for any enterprise, I think there are three dimensions to it. The first part is the revenue enhancement, right? So today I'm running with, take a case of banking, right? Probably my net interest margin is running at 2%. If I want to improve my bottom line, I need to enhance my revenue. So that's one dimension, revenue dimension. The other part of it, how do I contain my cost? That's the second part. So still my margin can be improved. Same volumes, make it 2.5%, right? How do I contain that? The third part, when I talked about this revenue enhancement, the whole lot of things is coming from the customer experience today. Okay? Now, on all the three parts, the revenue enhancement, today you are catering or distributing your service, reaching a customer through 10 channels, if you make it 20. If you can reach out to new geographies, obviously there are cases of revenue enhancement there. And how do you do that? You can't do it physically today. It's all digital, which is going to actually take you to the different segments of customers, the different marketplaces, how quickly you can launch products to it, which again could be a revenue enhancement to it. So digital comes here. I get a question. You are asking who is going to fund it. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. 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 So see, the point here is that they say that I've reached n number of markets. This is what I can reach. I have reached my maximum. That itself, the problem statement itself is wrong. You go back to that statement with a creative reframing, right? Now, anybody has told that banks can do only banking? And what is banking? It's about how people are going to manage money. You have a license to do your capital, with you maintain the accounts and you do the transaction, but there are a hell lot of other activities every consumer is doing with money today. And banking is all about managing money. It's not about managing your savings and checking account, right? So the perception of the market itself is different. And if you want to reach there, and that's where the digital is going to come in, that you need to collaborate with a larger ecosystem. And that's what I call as an everyday banking. It's not only about bank as an institution. Nobody wants this institution today. And we heard you heard from the panel, right? They were talking about that everybody want to call themselves a technology company with a banking license, right? So who is going to fund? Your problem statement there. And the funding will come from whom? Who will be benefited by this, right? And the benefit comes to whom? We talked about revenue enhancement. We talked about cost optimization. We talked about improved customer experience. None of the three dimensions are technology-centric. These are all business-centric. And that's why we heard Badri talking about, right? These fundings are not coming from technology today. It's coming from business. Because, see, the kind of competition they are facing, not only within the banks, the cross-border competition, right? When I say border is not geographic border, I'm talking about industry borders, right? that actually compels them to invest. Let me give some more data points to you, right? We talked about legacy systems. Average, if you see the entire data across the technology space, the spend they make on their BAU, which is the legacy which I want to keep lights on, is around 60 to 70% is the spend of the overall technology spend, right? The 30% is where they can invest on a development, a strategic initiative. Now, as you know, if you are in this industry, as a rule of thumb, if you make something, 30% of it would be your maintenance for next year, which means 30% of this 30%, which makes average 10%, is getting added to here. So you need to kill some application from here if you want to keep it at least at 70%, right? And that can come from business, because business want to make this 30% to 40% or even to 50%. That can only come when you optimize from this, what we call as an app modernization, right? So going back to your question, I think it comes from business because it's for the business. The three dimensions we talked about, which is going to benefit out of this, goes back to the business.
Hi, Anubha. I had a question for you. You spoke about the domain boundaries getting blurred, right? You know, when I started as a BA, I was told that domain is something that you learn at the client location. It's not really important. Over a period of time, domain became the most important thing. Are we now saying that, you know, it is not important anymore, and is that digital way of thinking and, you know, that digital way of processing something, is that the way we need to think? And if that is true, how does a BA go about doing that?
So you mean in terms of, you know, BAs now, are you saying that we again start looking at BAs starting to understand and work in different industries?
Yeah, so when we started off, it was requirements analysis, and then it, you know, we moved into being domain experts, and now there's a digital way of thinking.
Right.
So how does a BA transform himself? You know, how does it change? How does the change happen?
Sure. I'll take a stab and then I'll ask Rajeev also. So my view is that, yes, you're right. When you're talking about, you know, in today's world, we're talking about everything is digital, right? All the solutions that we're talking about is all digital. And if you look at it, with this whole digital coming into picture, we're seeing a lot more of cross-leverage happening, and that's why we are saying industry boundaries are blurring, right? I talk about an omni-channel experience. That's absolutely relevant to a lot of the industries which are client-facing, right? So I think from a BA standpoint, yes, while it is equally important for us to move in the direction in terms of learning the new digital solutions, right, thereby having the digital experience as well. But in terms of, it wouldn't mean in terms of you not trying to leave your actual domain knowledge as well, which is equally going to be important. Yes, what it will give you an exposure for sure is with the digital solution, you will also have a better understanding of how it would apply for another industry also, right? Given that we are now saying that we could get competitors from any industry, right? So which means that as BAs, we will certainly get a lot more exposure and understanding of how the other industry could also look at that particular solution. But my view is that it doesn't certainly mean that, we have to leave our domain centricity and then, kind of become a generalist. I wouldn't really go for that.
Yeah, I'll just add on to it, and thanks for that question, right? I think you go back to the main definition of business analyst, right? I'm not looking at a textbook definition for it. Two parts to it, the business and analysis. What is analysis? Analysis is adopting some scientific way of methods and standards and processes to analyze and infer something. Now, what something is business, and what is business today? Business we talk about is across industries, right? You take any industries, right? There are three levels to it. The first level we talked about from where they make money, who are their customers, how they interact with customers. That's the first part. Then the second part of it is how do you actually process that customer interaction to provide a value which is monetized as my revenue, profit, whatever it is. That's the second layer. The third layer, to run the system of customer interaction, and the second layer of running this process, I have my own enterprise structure to do it. Could be my cross functions, could be my, all called as HR, legal and all that, which is a corporate functions, right? Minimum, every firm will have these three layers. And what is different from a firm A in industry 1 versus firm B in industry 2 is the second layer. The kind of interaction everybody having with their consumers are converging. The kind of functions they do at the corporate functions level, the cross-industry functions, are also same. We are seeing, see ERP, SAP ERP running in a resources client versus a financial services client, very little difference. The key part over there is the second layer we are talking about. And the value of that second layer has become much more industrialized, right? It is running for last so many years, centuries. I talked about 2-century banks, right? It's running like that. It is still, the fundamentals are the very same things. You are only seeing certain add-ons on top of it with certain functionalities, but the flow never changes. So if you are stuck to that second layer, we are actually losing the value on the top layer. And the top layer is where the activity happens, because that's where you create the moments of truth with the customer. So for me, it looks like you actually leave with that term of business analysis and you stick on to the term of business. It's all about change, nothing else. And as a financial services practitioner, I need to be looking at what retailer is doing, because I see retailer is very well connected to banking, right? I see all that gamut of wallet sitting in financial services. So for me, change is the crux.
Hi, Rajeev.
Yeah.
Hello, Anu. It was a very informative session. Thanks for that. My question is that now that digitization is taking over in any industry, like be it retail, education, like healthcare, like what you have said, and each industry would have their own ethical dilemma. So could you please explain how that would be overcome specific to any one industry?
Yeah, see, this is something which cannot be resolved by a business analyst doing it. Okay, how do we resolve it? That's where the humanitarian part of the missions comes in. Okay, when I say that what makes a human different from the machine is all about that humane factor of it, right? And what is humane? If you want to list it out and say that in this scenario, if I'm doing like this, that makes me as a human versus anything else, right? And then you actually bring in that process as codified stuff to it and telling that in this scenario you're doing it. But the problem there is that
actually even each individual would have their own scenario.
Yeah. So that's where, I mean, if machine is going to do an activity, is going to replace a human. When I say human, in the actual business sense, it's going to represent a set of people, right? It's not that my individual variations need to be reflected in the machine. It's about the ethics for that particular industry. It's ethics for that workforce, right? That gets translated to a machine at that point. This itself is an ethical dilemma. I'm not telling that that's a solution to it. But everything would be very much individualized and need to be addressed like that.
Thank you.
I think, Rajeev, we need to stop.
Okay.